In the class, so we got late. And actually, I was supposed to take this class on Monday, but your CR informed me that some of you are not ready to for class on that day because Monday was a holiday for Eid, so I had to postpone it for Tuesday. But yesterday also, last minute, I got information that you have a PSM class, so again I had to postpone it for today. So today we will be discussing about a very important and practical topic, that is approach to a child with fever. In future, whether you become a pediatrician or a general practitioner, you will get lots of patients with fever in your OPD or in your hospital. And as you know that fever is not a disease per se. In fact, it is a symptom or sign of a underlying disease. And if you start listing, there are around hundreds or you can say thousands of diseases that present as fever as one of their symptoms. So sometimes it becomes very difficult to diagnose the cause of fever in a child and to manage them. And managing or treating a child with fever is not as easy as it seems. When we hear fever, हमको लगता है कि फीवर कौन सी बड़ा डिजीज है, ये तो आराम इजी है ट्रीट करना. लाइक फीवर होता है तो हम लोग बोलते हैं पैरासीटामोल खा लो, कैल्पोल खा लो. एवरीवन नोज दैट. Even I have a niece, 6-year-old. Whenever she gets cough, cold, fever, she calls me and asks me कि चाचा मैं वो कैल्पोल सिरप पी लूँ. तो even a 6-year-old kid knows that Calpol or paracetamol reduces fever. But as a doctor, you should know that fever is not due to paracetamol deficiency. That you give paracetamol and deficiency is corrected and fever will subside. It is not like that. In fact, it is a symptom and there is an underlying cause. So as a doctor, you should know how to diagnose the cause of the fever, and you have to treat the cause of the fever. Then only fever will subside. Yes, if you give paracetamol or any antibiotic, fever will subside, but it will subside only up to there is effect of paracetamol or antibiotic. Once the effect subsides, again the fever will start rising until and unless you treat the cause. Okay, so today we will be discussing some common causes of fever in children, and we will be discussing that how can stepwise we can progress to diagnose the root cause of the fever and treat it. Okay, and finally we will discuss how to treat fever in children. So feverish illness in children is the most common reason for children to be taken to the doctor, and it is a cause of concern for parents and caregivers. Definitely, fever occurs in response to either infection or injury or inflammation and has many causes, as I have discussed. And it can be a result of a simple self-limiting infection like common cold that we all get every season or every month, every year. That common cold, cough, cold, fever, we feel feverish. Then after 1 to 2 days, it subsides on its own. So it is self-limiting. Or a life-threatening disorder, like you can say meningitis, septicemia, or even some cancers like leukemia, lymphoma present with fever as one of their symptoms. So the cause of fever range from minor self-limiting infection to life-threatening disorder. And that is why it becomes imperative to diagnose the cause of the fever. Okay. So coming to definition of fever, in simple words, you can define fever as increase in body temperature above the normal value for an individual. So it is the simple definition of fever. But as a doctor, you should know that what is normal body temperature, what is normal value of body temperature. So in children, the normal body temperature varies between 36.1 to 37.8 degrees Celsius. that is 97 to 100 degree Fahrenheit. Okay. This is the rectal temperature, and fever is defined as rectal temperature of more than or equal to 38 degrees Celsius or 100.4 degree Fahrenheit. And hyperpyrexia is defined as rectal temperature of more than 40 degree Celsius or 104 degree Fahrenheit. Okay. So here you can see that fever is defined by rectal temperature. But for practical purposes or in our day-to-day life, we never measure rectal temperature. Okay. Instead, either we measure oral temperature or axillary temperature, or nowadays it's very commonly used, that is infrared thermometer, okay, for thermal scan. You might be seeing due to corona everywhere, in every airport, every railway station, every mall, every hospital, thermal scanning is being done, and that is done by non-contact infrared thermometer or thermal scanner. And these are very easier and like convenient to use or convenient to measure than rectal temperature. So as you can see that oral temperature is 0.5 to 1 degree Fahrenheit lower than the rectal temperature, and axillary temperature is 1 to 2 degree Fahrenheit lower than the rectal temperature. So if you want to define fever by oral or axillary temperature, then you can see that in an average oral and axillary temperature is around 1 degree Fahrenheit lower than the rectal temperature. So 100.4 minus 1 is 99.4. So rounding it off, it is 99.5. So you can define fever as oral or axillary temperature of more than 99.5 degree Fahrenheit. Okay. Now before discussing about further, you should know or you should remember some terminologies like fever without localizing signs or without focus, and fever of unknown origin or pyrexia of unknown origin. So fever without localizing signs or fever without focus is defined as frequently occurring fever in a child younger than 3 years in which a history and physical examination fails to establish the cause, although a diagnosis of occult bacteremia may be suggested by laboratory studies. Okay. So this is the definition of fever without a focus. Okay. So you get a child younger than 3 years and with fever, and you do take a complete history and do a complete physical examination, but still you cannot find the cause of the fever, and then you call it as fever without a focus or fever without localizing sign. Now there is another term, that is fever of unknown origin or pyrexia of unknown origin, which is defined as fever of more than 21 days without an identified etiology despite proper history, physical examination and routine laboratory tests, or after 1 week of hospitalization and evaluation. Okay. So this is the definition of pyrexia of unknown origin or fever of unknown origin. This may come as a short question in your exam. Okay, FEO or PUO. Fever can also be classified depending upon whether it has lasted 7 days or less, that is acute fever, or chronic fever if it has lasted for more than 7 days. Okay. There are some other terminologies like bacteremia. Bacteremia is defined as a positive blood culture and may be primary or secondary to a focal infection, whereas sepsis is the systemic response to infection that is manifested by hyperthermia or hypothermia, tachycardia, tachypnea and shock. Children with septicemia and signs of serious dysfunction like irritability, lethargy, cardiovascular impairment like cyanosis, poor perfusion, and disseminated intravascular coagulation, that is DIC, which presents with some features like petechiae, ecchymosis, are readily recognized as toxic appearing child or a septic child. Okay. So if a child has these features, then the child is said to have toxic appearing child or a septic child. Okay. Now apart from fever, apart from pathological condition, There are some normal physiological or normal variations in temperature as well. As you can see that there is a normal diurnal variation with maximum temperature in the late afternoon and minimum temperature in the early morning. Okay. So in the early morning at 4 to 6 a.m. the body temperature, if you measure the body temperature of a person, normal person, for 24 hours, then you will get that the person will be having a minimum temperature in the early morning around 4 to 6 a.m. and maximum temperature in the 24 hour at around in the evening, late evening, or in around 5 to 7 p.m. Okay. Apart from this diurnal variation, there is anatomic variation as well. Like as you have seen that rectal temperature, oral temperature, and axillary temperature varies. So if you measure temperature of a person at the same point of time in different anatomic region, then you will find the temperature varies. Like the temperature of a peripheral, like your palm and sole, is lower than your abdomen. So there is anatomic variation in temperature as well. Then there are some physiologic variation like age, sex, exercise, circadian rhythm, and underlying disorders. Okay. Children have a bit higher temperature than adults. I mean normal body temperature than adults. And it has been seen by some studies that females have slightly higher body temperature, slightly, than males. Definitely exercise increases your body temperature, and any underlying disorders like say hypothyroidism or hyperthyroidism will decrease or increase your body temperature respectively. Okay. Now, what is the pathophysiology of fever? The normal body temperature is maintained by a complex regulatory system in the anterior hypothalamus called as hypothalamic set point. Okay. And development of fever begins with the release of endogenous pyrogens into the circulation as a result of infection or inflammatory process like rheumatic disease or malignancy. So there is a set point. There is a set point or thermostat present in the anterior hypothalamus, which maintains our normal body temperature. By regulating various mechanisms, it maintains within the normal range, the temperature. But there are some release of endogenous pyrogens due to any reason we will discuss, any infection or inflammatory process or malignancy. Then these endogenous pyrogens increase the set point and cause fever. Microbes and microbial toxins act as exogenous pyrogens by stimulating the release of endogenous pyrogens, which include cytokines such as IL-1, IL-6, TNF, and interferon that are released by monocytes, macrophages, mesenchymal cells, glial cells, epithelial cells, and B lymphocytes. So these are the cells of our immune system, and they release endogenous pyrogens like interleukin 1, interleukin 6, TNF in response to some exogenous pyrogens. Now these endogenous pyrogens reach the anterior hypothalamus via the arterial blood supply, liberating arachidonic acid. Now this arachidonic acid is metabolized to prostaglandin E2, and this prostaglandin E2 causes the elevation of hypothalamic thermostat. Okay? It increases the hypothalamic thermostat and hence fever occurs. Okay? There is acute phase response to fever in our body as well. Like there are some metabolic changes like negative nitrogen balance, loss of body weight, altered synthesis of hormones, hematologic alterations like leukocytosis, thrombocytosis. There is altered hepatocyte function like increase in acute phase reactants like C-reactive protein, serum amyloid A, fibrinogen, fibronectin, hepatoglobin, ceruloplasmin, ferritin, and there is decreased level of albumin and transfer. Okay. And there are some definitely if there is a fever, a person feels discomfort. So as you can see that for each degree Celsius elevation of body temperature, the BMR or metabolic rate increases by around 10 to 15%, whereas insensible water loss increases by around 300 to 500 ml per meter square per day for each 1 degree Celsius elevation in body temperature. Oxygen consumption also increases by around 13%, and heart rate increases by 10 to 15 beats per minute for every 1 degree elevation in body temperature. Okay, so these are some physiological changes which happens in response to increased body temperature. There are some conditions which attenuates the fever response, like fever may not be present in these conditions despite infection in newborn, elderly, or patient with uremia, or any significant patient with significant malnutrition, or a person taking corticosteroids. Because in these conditions or in these categories, there is immunodeficiency, like relative immunodeficiency, and as you know that endogenous pyrogens which increase the thermal set point are released by our immune system, cells of our immune system. So if immune system is suppressed, then there will be less release of endogenous pyrogens and there will be no increase in fever. So immunosuppression, if a child a person with immunosuppression, even despite having an infection, may not like present with fever. Okay. Now there are some benefits of fever as well, like it has protective role in the immune system by inhibiting of growth and replication of microorganisms. It aids in body's acute phase reaction, enhanced immunologic function of WBC, like lymphocyte response to mitogens, bacterial activity of neutrophils, and production of interferon. It also promotes the monocyte maturation into macrophages, promotes lymphocyte activation and antibody production, decreased availability of free iron for bacterial replication. Okay. So these are beneficial effects of fever on our body. Now coming to the most important thing, that is how to take or how to measure a child's temperature, because there are various ways of measuring a child's temperature and there are various instruments for measuring temperature. So a child's temperature can be taken from the rectum, ear, mouth, forehead or armpit or axilla. It can be taken with a glass or mercury thermometer or a digital thermometer, or as I have said, nowadays we are using that non-contact infrared thermometer. Okay. You might have seen in news and everywhere that in airports or everywhere thermal scanning is being done. Okay, and that is by using this non-contact infrared thermometer. The glass thermometer needs to be shaken before use to make sure the temperature they show is below the normal body temperature. Then they must be left in place for 2 to 3 minutes. Okay. Earlier we were using the glass thermometer which contains mercury. So all of you must have seen that. So before using we were like shaking it so that the mercury level comes down to the minimum, and that has to be kept for at least 2 to 3 minutes to read the accurate temperature. And nowadays it is being it is discouraged, okay, for using glass thermometer or mercury thermometer, because as you know that mercury is a poisonous substance. It is a heavy metal and it is a neurotoxin. So if a glass thermometer containing mercury breaks, then there is leakage or spilling of mercury, and that vaporizes easily at normal temperature, and that when we inhale, that can cause it is a neurotoxin. Okay. So use of mercury thermometer is not recommended nowadays. Instead we are using digital thermometers. Digital thermometers are easier to use and give much quicker readings and usually give a signal when they are ready. So you all also have seen this digital thermometer. when you put it and when it has finished recording the temperature, it will give you a signal by a beeping sound, and it takes around hardly 30 seconds to 1 minute, very much less than glass thermometer. Okay, so digital thermometer is easier, safer, and it gives signal when it has measured the temperature. Now this is the picture of a non-contact infrared thermometer that nowadays we are using. Okay, the advantage is this thermometer you can take temperature without touching the patient. Okay, from a distance itself. This instrument uses infrared, and it measures the forehead temperature. Okay, and it measures temperature within fraction of second. So it is very convenient and very easier to use as well. But the accuracy is not as good as taking rectal temperature. Okay, but it is good for screening purposes. Easy, very quick to measure, and convenient. And most probably it is most importantly it is non-contact. You don't have to touch the patient. Okay. Oral temperatures are taken by placing a glass or digital thermometer under the child's tongue. Oral temperatures provide reliable readings but are difficult to take in young children. Young children have difficulty keeping their mouth gently closed around the thermometer, which is necessary for an accurate reading. The age at which oral temperature can be reliably taken varies from child to child, but is typically after 4 years of age. Because if you put a thermometer in a young infant's mouth, then there is a chance that they will bite it and they will not follow your command. Okay? Because you have to put it below your tongue, and a young infant is not supposed to follow your command. So you can use or you can take oral temperature only in a child around 5 years or older. Okay, who follows your command. Then rectal temperature is the most accurate temperature because it most accurately shows your reflects your core body temperature. Okay, that is, they come closest to child's true internal body temperature. For a rectal temperature, the bulb of the thermometer should be coated with lubricant. Then the thermometer is gently inserted about half to 1 inch into the rectum while the child is lying face down, and the child should be kept from moving. Okay. So here it is very troublesome, you have to put the thermometer in the rectum of the child, and sometimes it has complications always because there is chance of injury to the rectum. Okay, so it is not convenient to take rectal temperature. So you take usually that axillary and oral temperature. There is another way of taking temperature is by your measuring ear temperature. Again, it is done by a digital device that measures infrared radiation from the eardrum. And ear thermometers are unreliable in infants and under 3 months of old children. For an ear temperature, the thermometer probe is placed around the opening of the ear so that a seal is formed. Then the start button is pressed. A digital readout provides the temperature. But again, this ear temperature measurement is not done routinely in our day-to-day practice. Now coming to forehead or temporal artery temperature, it is taken by with a digital device that measures infrared radiation from an artery in the forehead, that is temporal artery. For a forehead temperature, the head of the thermometer is moved lightly across the forehead from hairline to hairline while pressing the scan button. A digital readout provides the temperature. Forehead temperature are not as accurate as rectal temperatures, particularly in infants under 3 months old. Okay. Now armpit temperature or axillary temperature are taken by placing a glass or digital thermometer in the child's armpit directly on the skin. Doctors rarely use this method because it is less accurate than others like oral temperature or your rectal temperature. But in a child who is a younger child, you have to taking armpit temperature or axillary temperature is more convenient. Oral and rectal temperature measurements do not routinely use the oral and rectal routes to measure the body temperature of children between 0 to 5 years. And measurement of body temperature at other sites, like in infants under the age of 4 weeks, measure body temperature with an electronic thermometer in the axilla, whereas in children of 4 weeks to 5 years, measure body temperature by one of the following methods, like electronic thermometer in the axilla, chemical dot thermometer in the axilla, again that is not very commonly used here, not available here. And next is infrared tympanic thermometer or infrared forehead thermometer. Okay. Now there are different grades of fever, like mild or high fever, or mild grade or low grade or high grade fever. Okay. Mild or low grade fever is between 37.8 degree to 38.5 degrees Celsius, whereas high or grade fever is defined as when the temperature is more than 38.5 degrees Celsius. And very high temperature is when the body temperature exceeds 41 degrees Celsius. Okay. And as you all know, there are some patterns of fever, like depending upon the disease and age, the pattern of fever are a bit different. So we will discuss some pattern of fever. And the pattern of fever may vary in different conditions and could assist in the diagnosis of the cause of the fever. Some of the types of fever are listed below: continuous fever, remittent fever, intermittent fever. So in continuous fever, the fever that doesn't fluctuate more than 1 degree Celsius in 24 hours is called as continuous fever. And a continuous fever never touches the baseline. Okay. So if you take a 24-hour continuous reading, you will see that the temperature is always above the normal temperature, but the fluctuation in temperature is less than 1 degree Celsius. Whereas a remittent fever, the fluctuations is more than 1 degree Celsius in 24 hours. And it also do not touch the baseline. So if you measure the 24-hour temperature, both in continuous fever and remittent fever, the temperature will not touch the baseline. Okay. But in differences, in continuous fever, the fluctuation is less than 1 degree Celsius, whereas in remittent fever, the fluctuation is more than 1 degree Celsius. So for example, if you measure the temperature of a child continuously, then at a point of time you get around 101 degree Fahrenheit, then you get 103, then you get 100, again 101, then 103, like this. Then this is remittent fever. Okay, because the fever is not coming below 101, it is not touching the baseline, and there is fluctuation of more than 1 degree Celsius. Okay, but if you just a minute, I am getting a call from emergency. हाँ बोलो. गुड मॉर्निंग. एक काम करो ना, उसको इमरजेंसी में दिखा दो. मैं एक्चुअली अभी क्लास ले रहा हूँ स्टूडेंट्स का, है ना. मैं भी स्टूडेंट्स का क्लास ले रहा हूँ, मुझे अराउंड आधा घंटा लग जाएगा. हेलो, तो उसको इमरजेंसी में दिखा दो. अब मैं आ रहा हूँ आधा घंटे में, ठीक है. So sorry for the disturbance. So this is the difference between continuous and remittent fever. Whereas intermittent fever that is present only for some time in the day, is called as intermittent fever, and in between the child will have normal temperature, and it is seen in malaria, mainly malaria caused by Plasmodium vivax, Plasmodium like falciparum. Now I am showing you a graph so that you can understand it better. So in this graph you can see that the graph A, I hope you can see the pointer on your screen. I am using the pointer to show you that the graph A is of a continuous fever. As you can see that this is the baseline, the line, black line is the baseline of the fever. So continuous fever, it increases slowly, and as it reaches at like particular temperature, it stays in that same temperature for 24 hours, you can say, or for longer duration. That is called as continuous fever. Whereas you can see that in the graph B, it is also a continuous fever, but it is with abrupt onset and remission. The first one, there is slow onset and slow remission, but the second one is also a continuous fever, but there is sudden rise in temperature and sudden fall in temperature. Okay. Whereas the graph C, you can see that it is of a remittent fever. That there is periodical increase and decrease in fever, as you can see. Okay. But the fever, the temperature do not touch the baseline. It is always above the baseline. The patient is always have fever. Okay. Whereas intermittent fever, as you can see in the graph D, that there is periodical increase in fever as well as decrease in fever below the normal temperature. Okay. Temperature will be there will be fever. Temperature will rise. Then after some time, the temperature will be normal. Again, after some time, the temperature will rise, and after some time, it will be normal. So that is called as intermittent fever. Now the graph E is called as undulant fever. That there is slow rise, then slow fall, slow rise, slow fall. That continuously rising, falling, rising, falling. That is called undulant fever. And relapsing fever, as you know, that there will be a abrupt like fall in fever and sudden increase in fever. And when there is increase in fever, it will remain for some period of time at a constant temperature. Okay. And then again it will fall suddenly. Then again after some time it will rise suddenly, and it will remain at a constant temperature. So it is called as relapsing fever. Okay. So hope you guys understood it by this graph. What is continuous fever, what is intermittent fever, what is relapsing fever and remittent fever, all that. Now there is another term called as hectic or septic fever. Fever variation between the highest and lowest temperature is very large and more than 5 degrees Celsius. Okay, and that is called as hectic fever, and that is seen in septicemia. And that is why the fever is also called as septic fever. Next is Paulastin fever. The febrile and afebrile periods alternate and follow a definitive pattern. For example, it is seen in Hodgkin's lymphoma and other lymphomas, where there is a fever for 3 to 10 days and is followed by a fever-free period of 3 to 10 days with the same cycle repeating. So this is called as Paulastin fever, mainly seen in Hodgkin's lymphoma. Next is fever with chills or rigor. Rigor is the shaking or excessive shivering that accompanies fever. So this is seen in mainly conditions like malaria, kala-jar, filariasis, UTI, inflammation of gallbladder, septicemia, infective endocarditis, or inflammation of the inner layer of the heart like endocarditis. Okay. Abscesses like deep abscesses like liver abscess, kidney abscess, and pneumonia. Okay, so these are the conditions that may cause fever with rigors. Okay, this we have discussed. Now we will discuss some of the important causes of fever in pediatrics. Infectious causes account for around 60 to 70% of causes of fever in children. Okay, we will discuss what are the infectious causes. Next is autoimmune diseases or some malignant diseases. Okay. And even with regressive extensive investigations, the cause remains undiagnosed in around 10 to 20% of cases. Okay. That is called as pyrexia of unknown origin. Now coming to the causes, most commonly infectious causes. In India, the most common causes of fever are enteric fever, malaria, UTI, tuberculosis. Okay, these are the most common causes that we encounter, that we find in our day-to-day practice. Other causes include chronic hepatitis, HIV, occult abscess like liver abscess or pelvic abscess, mastocytitis, sinusitis, osteomyelitis, meningitis, infectious mononucleosis, infective endocarditis, brucellosis, CMV, toxoplasmosis, kala-jar, and the list goes on. Okay, there are again other various causes of fever, infective causes. Okay. Then next comes autoimmune causes. There are various autoimmune diseases that cause fever, like JIA or JRA, that is juvenile rheumatoid arthritis, Kawasaki disease, systemic lupus erythematosus, that is SLE, inflammatory bowel disease, polyarteritis nodosa. So these are some autoimmune diseases that cause fever. Malignancies like leukemia, lymphoma, and Langerhans histiocytosis can also present as with fever as as one of their symptom. Okay. So these are some of the causes we have discussed. There are hundreds of causes actually. Now, how to approach a child with fever? Suppose you are sitting in an OPD and you get a child whose mother is complaining that the child is having fever since last few days. Okay, and the child has no other symptom. Then how to approach the child? So first is, as you all know, taking proper history. And in history, most important is personal history. That is age of the patient, because many etiologies has age predilection. Like many diseases occur in a particular age group. Okay, so by knowing the age of the child, you can exclude many of the diseases causing fever. Okay. Then occupation in older children. Okay, place of origin and travel history is definitely important. As you know, nowadays in Corona, travel history is important. Not only in Corona, COVID-19, in every contagious disease, travel history is important. Like for example, if a person from Delhi or Mumbai who has travelled to Chhattisgarh or Odisha or Jharkhand, where malaria is endemic, and he stays there for around 15 days to 1 month and return back to Delhi or Mumbai, then he gets fever. Okay, then you can suspect that the patient might be having malaria, because Odisha, Chhattisgarh, Jharkhand are endemic in malaria. So this is an example that how travel history can help you to ascertain to certain extent to ascertain the cause of the fever. Then some habits like consumption of unpasteurized dairy products that may cause brucellosis, leptospirosis and all. Again, underlying diseases like splenectomy. It's a person who has splenectomy are more prone to be infected with capsulated organisms like Streptococcus pneumoniae, H. influenzae. Okay. Then any surgical implantation or prosthesis, they are more prone for infection. Immunodeficiency, definitely a person with immunodeficiency is more prone to infection. But person with immunodeficiency do not usually, as you have discussed, that do not usually present with fever due to immunodeficiency. Then chronic diseases like cirrhosis, congenital chronic heart disease and chronic lung disease, you should take history of this. Okay. Now in drug history, whether the child has taken any antipyretics for reduction of fever or not, whether the child is taking any immunosuppressants or any antibiotics. Okay. In family history of tuberculosis in the family is very, very important. In a country like India, where TB is very much prevalent. Okay. So if you get a child with chronic fever, then family history of tuberculosis is a must. Okay. Or any recent infection in the family, so that the child might have got the infection from that family member. Now you should ask for some associated symptoms like shaking or chills, ear pain or ear drainage or hearing loss. Okay, to rule out ASOM, CSOM. Any visual symptom, chest or pulmonary symptom, to rule out tuberculosis, pneumonia and other respiratory infection. Abdominal symptoms, to rule out any abdominal infections. Back, joint or skeletal pain, to rule out any rheumatological disorder like arthritis. Then you have to do a complete physical examination, like vital signs, neurological examination, skin vital signs, because if the child is having septicemia or in shock, then you will get low volume pulse, low blood pressure, okay, prolonged CRT, So from that you can diagnose whether the child is having septicemia or shock. Neurological examination you can do to rule out meningitis and encephalitis. Okay. Skin lesions, mucous membrane lesions, some diseases present with skin lesions or mucous membrane lesions, like as you have discussed, like any DIC or infective endocarditis or many viral diseases, they have present the skin lesions. Then you have to do eye ENT examination. Lymphadenopathy is again very important because tuberculosis and many other infective diseases or non-infective diseases like malignancies like lymphoma and leukemia may present with lymphadenopathy. Examination of lungs and heart cardiovascular system is important to rule out any disease of this system. Abdominal examination like for hepatomegaly, splenomegaly, rule out lymphoma, leukemia or any other disease. Musculoskeletal examination to rule out rheumatological disease. Now as you can see that various physical findings can point towards various diagnoses, some diagnoses. So you have to carefully examine for some if the child has any physical findings, like in your head-to-toe examination. Okay? Like as you can see that if the child is having sinus tenderness, then it is suggestive of sinusitis. Okay, and if the child is having any nodules or reduced pulsation in the temporal artery, then it is suggestive of temporal arteritis. If there is any ulcerations in the oropharynx, it is suggestive of disseminated histoplasmosis, SLE, inflammatory bowel disease, okay, and Behcet syndrome or periodic fever syndrome. Tender tooth may be suggestive of periapical abscess. You should also examine the fundus and the conjunctiva to see any choroid tubercle, petechiae or rust spot. Those are seen in disseminated granulomatosis or infective endocarditis. Any thyroid enlargement or tenderness are suggestive of thyroiditis. Finding of murmur in the heart is suggestive of may suggest towards infective or merantic endocarditis. Enlarged iliac crest lymph nodes or splenomegaly in the abdominal examination can point towards lymphoma, endocarditis, disseminated granulomatosis. Okay. Like this, there are lots of physical findings that suggest toward a particular disease. Okay, so you have to have a careful examination. You have to get a careful examination, complete physical examination of the child to diagnose the cause of the fever. Okay. Again, you have to check for any immediately life-threatening features. Like we have discussed that fever can be due to a small or minor self-limiting disorder, or it can be due to a serious life-threatening disorder like septicemia or meningitis or any malignancy. So if a patient presents to you with fever, especially a infant or newborn, then you have to check for any immediately life-threatening features. Okay, we will see what are the life-threatening or danger signs. And for that you have to use the traffic light system to check for symptoms and signs that predict the risk of serious illness. Okay, look for a source of fever and check symptoms and signs associated with specific diseases. Measure and record the temperature, heart rate, respiratory rate, capillary refill time, that is CRT, and assess for dehydration. So these are the vital signs like heart rate, respiratory rate, temperature, capillary refill time, and that you have to measure so as to exclude that the child is not having any serious illness. Okay. And the traffic light system is like this, that it is a tool for identifying the likelihood of serious illness. Okay. As you know that the traffic light uses red, yellow and green light. So also in this traffic light system we use three colors: green, amber and red color. That if a child, there are some like diseases listed in every category, the green column, amber column, red column, and if a children with only symptoms and signs in the green column, are at lower risk, whereas children with one or more signs or symptoms in the amber column are at intermediate risk. Whereas if a child has one or more symptom or sign in the red zone, then the child has high risk, or child is at high risk. Okay. Now coming first to the green color, that a child is said to have in a green zone if the color of the skin of the child is normal, skin, lip and tongue is normal. In activity, the child is responds normally to social cues, content and smiles. Stays awake or awakens quickly. Strong, normal or normal cry or not crying. Okay. In hydration, the child has normal skin and eyes and moist mucous membranes. Okay, that means the child has normal hydration, and none of the symptoms from the amber or red zones. Okay, so then the child is said to have in green zone or in a low risk zone. Okay. Now this is amber color and medium risk. If the child has a pale color of skin, okay, and if the parent or caregiver notice a pale color of skin, and if the activity the child is not responding normally to social cues, wakes only with prolonged stimulation, decreased activity, no smile. In respiratory system, if the child has nasal flaring, tachypnea, that is respiratory rate more than 50 per minute in a child with 6 months to 1 year, and respiratory rate more than 40 per minute in a child of more than 1 year of age. Oxygen saturation less than or equal to 95% in room air, or any crackles or crepitations on auscultation of the chest. In hydration, there is dry mucous membrane, poor feeding in infants. CRT, that is capillary refill time, is more than or equal to 3 seconds, and there is reduced urine output. And if the fever is more than lasting for more than or equal to 5 days, swelling of a limb or joint, the child is not bearing weight or not using an extremity, or has a new lump or newly developed lump of more than 2 centimeter, then if the child is having any one of these signs of symptoms out of these, then the child is said to have in medium risk. And a child is said to have in high risk if either the color of the skin is pale, mottled, ashen or blue. The in activity there is no response to social cues, appears ill to a healthcare professional, unable to arouse, or if aroused doesn't stay awake. The child has weak or high-pitched or continuous cry. In respiratory system, there is grunting, tachypnea, and moderate to severe chest entering as well. Hydration, there is reduced skin turgor. Skin pinch is delayed, as you have discussed in our dehydration topic. How you can assess dehydration by like examining the skin pinch, okay, skin turgor. And if the child's age is 0 to 3 months, then the temperature is more than 38 degrees Celsius, and in 3 to 6 months temperature is more than or equal to 39 degrees Celsius. Non-blanching rash, neck stiffness, focal neurological signs, bile stain, vomiting, bulging frontal, status epilepticus, focal seizures. So these are the danger signs. And if the child has any one of these signs or symptoms, then the child is said to be in the high risk category. Okay. Now there are some diseases. They have specific diseases. They have specific like signs and symptoms. Okay. So I think I should not discuss all, and we will discuss these diseases in their respective chapter. Okay, and we will discuss the signs, symptoms, their management, their pathophysiology, everything in their respective chapters. So I am not discussing everything this all today. Okay, we will discuss when we will be discussing the respective topic. Okay. So my point is, by looking at some signs and symptoms, you can also it also points towards some particular disease. Okay, so if you know that this disease presents with these signs and symptoms, then you can diagnose easily the cause of fever. Okay, Now comes the laboratory evaluation. Okay, after you have done history, taken proper history and physical examination, and you do not find the cause of the fever, then you have to go for some laboratory evaluations. Okay, laboratory studies are done to assess the extent and severity of the inflammatory response to infection, to determine the site or sites and complications or organ involved by the process, and to determine the etiology of the infectious disease. Okay, so these are the reasons we have to go for laboratory studies. In laboratory evaluation, the laboratory evaluation is done by case-to-case basis, on case-to-case basis. But for all, the initial diagnostic testing is a complete blood count, like CBC, and in that in CBC you get all the parameters like hemoglobin, MCV, MCH, MCSC. Okay, your total leukocyte count, total platelet count, differential count. You get everything in CBC. That is called complete blood count. So, like for example, if you have anemia with fever, then it may be due to malaria, tuberculosis, or GIA. Okay, and if there is any cytopenia of more than one cell line and or vigor or immature forms, so it may be suggestive of leukemia or hemophagocytic lymphohistiocytosis, that is HLH. Leukocytosis is suggestive of infection or any malignancy like leukemia. Thrombocytosis is again maybe suggestive of any rheumatological disorders like GIA, Kawasaki disease, and it's a non-specific marker of inflammation. Okay, thrombocytosis is a non-specific marker of inflammation. The other investigations include ESR and C-reactive protein. These are called as acute phase reactants. Okay, and these are non-specific markers of inflammation. Elevation of ESR and CRP decreases the likelihood of factitious fever, and elevated ESR and CRP can be used to monitor the disease progress. Okay, urine analysis and urine culture is done to rule out UTI. Blood culture is done to isolate the organism which is present. Tuberculin skin testing or Montoux test is done to diagnose tuberculosis. Chest radiograph to rule out any infective pathology of your lungs, respiratory system. Okay, like tuberculosis, pneumonia, and other diseases. Now, further or next evaluation, like second line investigations include, if after the primary investigation you do not reach at the diagnosis, then you can go for the second line investigations like ELISA for HIV, contrast enhanced CT for chest and abdomen, bone marrow biopsy, echocardiogram, ANA, okay, to screen for any rheumatological disease, rheumatoid factor for rheumatoid arthritis. Other serologic tests may include serology for brucellosis, Paul Bunel test, and leptospirosis. Test for leptospirosis. So Paul Bunel test is done for your infectious mononucleosis. You must have read in your microbiology. For testing, for diagnosing the IgM and IgG of your Epstein-Barr virus. Okay, Paul Bunel test. Now coming to the management of a management of a children 3 months to 5 years. So look for life-threatening or traffic light and specific diseases or symptoms and sign. And if the child is in your green zone or in the low risk zone, then perform test for UTI, assess for pneumonia. You don't have to perform routine blood test and chest X-ray. Okay, because the child has low risk, so you don't have to do all the investigation or all the invasive investigations. Okay. But if there is no diagnosis is reached, then manage the child at home with appropriate care to the advice. Okay. If you get the diagnosis, then treat appropriately. But if you do not reach the diagnosis and if the child is in low risk, then you can send back the child with some symptomatic treatment with proper advice to the parents by teaching them or giving them the knowledge of some danger signs they have to look for. Okay. And if the child is in medium risk category, then you should perform urine test to rule out UTI, CBC, it is full blood count, blood culture and C-reactive protein. Perform chest X-rays if fever is higher than 39 degrees Celsius and white blood cells count is greater than 20,000 per microliter. Okay. Consider lumbar puncture if the child is younger than 1 year old, because younger childs have more chance of developing meningitis. So CSF lumbar puncture for examining the CSF, okay, is done to rule out meningitis. And if the child is in red zone, then you should perform blood culture, full blood count, urine test for UTI, C-reactive protein, and consider the following as guided by clinical assessment, like lumbar puncture to rule out meningitis and encephalitis, chest X-ray, serum electrolyte, and blood gas. And if at any point of time, you should not hesitate to admit the child if the child has any signs of symptoms or danger signs or symptoms. And if admission is not necessary but no diagnosis has been reached, provide a safety net for the parents and caregivers. Okay. Now, management of children under 3 months. Again, you have to assess and look for life-threatening traffic light and specific disease symptom and signs. Then observe and measure temperature, heart rate, respiratory rate. Perform full blood count, C-reactive protein, blood culture, urine test, chest X-ray, stool culture. Because fever in younger, newborns and younger infants can be very serious. Okay, can be a result of very serious infection. So you have to assess them very carefully. Okay. And if required, admit and perform lumbar puncture and start parenteral antibiotics if the child is younger than 1 month old. So if a child of 1 month old comes to you with high grade fever, then you have to admit the infant or newborn and you have to perform lumbar puncture. Or if the child is 1 to 3 months of old and appearing unwell, or if the child is 1 to 3 months old and with a white cell count of less than 5,000 or greater than 15,000. Okay. Whenever possible, perform a lumbar puncture before the administration of antibiotics, because once you administer antibiotic, there is chance that the CSF will be sterile and you cannot identify the cause of your infection. Okay. So you have to perform all the tests like blood culture and CSF examination before administering antibiotics. Now, if the child is younger than 3 months old, we have discussed that there is a high possibility that they have serious bacterial infections like with Streptococcus pneumoniae, Haemophilus influenzae, non-typhoidal salmonella, group B Streptococcus, Neisseria meningitidis, and they can have UTI, pneumonia, meningitis, bacterial diarrhea, septic arthritis. So for that you have to perform relevant tests. Okay. So differentiation between viral and bacterial infections in young infants is difficult. Febrile infants younger than 3 months and 3 months old who appear ill, and all febrile infants younger than 4 weeks old usually are admitted to the hospital for empirical antibiotics pending culture results, especially if there is uncertainty of follow-up. Okay. After blood, urine and CSF specimens are obtained, for culture, broad spectrum parenteral antibiotics like cefotaxime and ampicillin are started. Okay. The choice of antibiotics depends upon the pathogens suggested by localizing findings, which may indicate possible pneumonia, infectious arthritis, osteomyelitis, and meningitis. Okay. So when we will be discussing about these diseases like pneumonia, osteomyelitis, meningitis, we will discuss what are the most common pathogens causing these diseases in which age group. So according to, we have to administer the antibiotic. Okay. Well appearing febrile infant of 4 weeks of age or older without an identifiable focus with good follow-up or with no history of prematurity or prior antimicrobial therapy with a white cell count of 5,000 to 15,000 with urine with less than 10 WBCs with high power field and in stool less than 5 WBC of high power field and with normal chest x-ray may be followed as outpatient without empirical antibiotics treatment or sometimes are treated with the long acting antibiotics like ceftriaxone given intramuscularly. So if you have a child with 4 weeks or older and you get these results on your examination, on your test, blood test, urine test, stool test, okay. So regardless of antibiotic treatment, close follow-up for at least 72 hours, including re-evaluation in 24 hours or immediately with any clinical change is essential. So children between 2 months and 3 years of age are at increased risk of infection with organisms like Streptococcus pneumoniae, Neisseria meningitis, and non-typical Salmonella. Okay, and in this age group, the most common identified serious bacterial infection is urinary tract infection. That you should remember. Okay. And most of the episodes of fever in children younger than 3 years of old have demonstrable source of infection that is elicited by history and physical examination or simple laboratory tests. Okay. And any ill-appearing children should be admitted to the hospital and treated with antibiotics, whereas well-appearing children usually are followed up as outpatient without empirical antibiotics treatment or sometimes treated with IM ceftriaxone. Okay. Now coming to treatment, so you should remember that younger the age, more is the chance of serious bacterial infection. Okay, so if you get a newborn child with fever with measurement of fever higher than 38 degrees Celsius for 1 to 2 times, then also you have to admit the patient and find out the cause. Okay, because they may have very serious bacterial infections, and as the age increases, chances of serious bacterial infections decreases. So younger is the child, more is the chance of serious bacterial infection. So you have to manage them accordingly. Okay. So most fevers are associated with self-limited infections, most commonly of viral origin. If the fever results from a disorder that you diagnose, then that disorder should be treated. Because as I have said, that fever is not a disease; it is a symptom due to some underlying disease, and you have to treat the disease. You cannot treat only the fever. If you give any antipyretics or any paracetamol, then definitely the fever may subside, but for a particular time, okay, for say about 4 to 6 hours, up to the duration of the antipyretic effect is there. Okay, then again it will arise if you do not treat the cause of the disease. I mean fever. Okay. So first you have to take some general measures like drinking of plenty of clear fluids to replace the fluids lost by sweating, vomiting or diarrhea. Either water or an oral rehydration solution which contains electrolytes. So we have seen that fever uh, causes loss of like water by around 300 to 500 ml per meter square per day. So a child having high grade fever may have dehydration, and a child with fever may have vomiting or diarrhea, so there may be dehydration. So you have to give adequate fluid to the child. And many times, especially newborn, have a self-limiting disorder called as dehydration fever. Okay, usually on the first or second day of the childbirth, uh, a mother do not have adequate milk secretion, so the infant or the newborn do not get adequate amount of water or milk, so there is dehydration, and dehydration can cause fever in newborns. So if a child 1 to 2 years of age is having fever, then you ask whether the mother is having adequate milk or not. And if the mother is not having adequate milk, then it may be due to dehydration fever. And once you start giving adequate amount of fluid to the child orally by formula feed or any other feed, then you will see that the fever will subside. So that was due to dehydration fever, okay, due to inadequate amount of breast milk, and that is self-limiting, and that can be corrected by giving adequate amount of fluid. So whatever may be the cause of fever, you should always give adequate amount of fluid to drink. Then you should change the clothing and bed linen frequently. Tepid baths should be done if the temperature is very high, like more than 101 degree Fahrenheit. Then you should do a tepid water sponging, by you should take a cloth and make it wet, and you should wipe it. Okay, first you should sponge the body of the baby so as to decrease the temperature. Okay, that is called as tepid bath. But you should not use cold water. You should use only normal tap water. Okay, either neither very cold water or not very hot water. Normal temperature, water with normal temperature. Okay, and if you use cold water, then there is a chance that it will further increase the core body temperature. Okay, by causing shivering, because if there is a shivering, if you feel cold in your skin, there will be shivering to conserve the temperature, and instead of decreasing temperature, the temperature will increase, will rise if you use the cold water. Okay, and you should keep the clothes and blankets to a minimum. Avoid hot water bottles or electric blankets. You should ventilate the room properly, because ventilation may reduce the temperature by conduction and convection. And there are many other unhelpful local remedies, ranging from the harmless remedies like putting onions or potatoes in the child's socks to very uncomfortable things like coining or cupping. So these local remedies should be avoided and should be discouraged. Okay. Now coming to drugs for reduction of fever, acetaminophen or paracetamol is the most commonly used and the safest drug to treat fever in children. And acetaminophen can be given either by mouth or by a suppository, or you can give either intramuscular or even intravenously. Okay, so tablet, syrup, suppository, IM injections, IV injections are available. Paracetamol. Okay, and it is the safest drug to give because it has the minimum side effect. Paracetamol has the minimum side effect, and we use only paracetamol mainly most of the time for treating fever. Another drug is ibuprofen, which is given by mouth. And rarely acetaminophen and ibuprofen is given to prevent a fever, as when infants have been vaccinated. So these are given to treat fever, but sometimes it is given to prevent fever when fever is expected, like after immunization. Okay, after giving pentavalent vaccine, there is a chance that the patient may get fever. So to prevent fever, sometimes we prescribe acetaminophen or ibuprofen or combination of both. Okay, but aspirin is no longer used for lowering fever in children because it can interact with certain viral infections like influenza and chickenpox and cause a serious disorder called as Reye syndrome. Okay, so aspirin is not used to treat fever in children. Okay. As I have said, the most common drug is acetaminophen, and you can give ibuprofen, or sometimes nowadays we give mefenamic acid as well, because the duration of action of mefenamic acid is a bit longer than paracetamol, but again they have more side effects than paracetamol. So acetaminophen has minimum side effect, okay, out of these all antipyretics. So always you give paracetamol in children. As you can see that acetaminophen is generally a first line antipyretic due to being well tolerated with minimal side effects, and the pediatric dose is 10 to 15 milligram per kg per dose every 4 to 6 hours, okay, or as and when required. Whereas the dose of ibuprofen is 5 to 10 milligram per kg per dose orally every 6 to 8 hours or as needed. Now coming to fever of unknown origin, as I have said that it can come as a short note in your exam. You should remember the definition, that fever of unknown origin was defined as fever with a temperature of more than 100.1 degree Fahrenheit on several occasions, lasting for more than 3 weeks, which includes a hospital stay of more than 1 week with a failure to diagnose the cause by investigation, okay, by routine investigations. But Durack and Street proposed a revised system of classification of FUO, and according to this, FUO includes classic FUO, nosocomial FUO, neutropenic FUO, and FUO associated with HIV infection. So classic FUO is defined as more than 38.3 degrees Celsius, lasting for more than 3 weeks, and diagnosis is uncertain despite appropriate investigation after at least 3 outpatient visits or at least 3 days in hospital stay. So this is classic FUO. Whereas nosocomial FUO is fever of more than 38 degree Celsius, and infection was not manifest or incubating on admission. So nosocomial means hospital acquired. So initially there was no fever, but the child develops fever after infection after being admitted to the hospital, and failure to reach the diagnosis despite 3 days of appropriate investigation in the hospital patient. Okay. Next is neutropenic FUO. Okay. Again fever more than 38.3 degree and neutrophil count less than 500 per millimeter cube, or is expected to fall to that level in 1 to 2 days, and failure to reach diagnosis despite 3 days of investigation. Next is HIV associated FUO. Again fever more than 38.3 degrees Celsius, and fever of more than 3 weeks for a outpatient or more than 3 days for a hospitalized patient with HIV infection. Okay. So this is HIV associated FUO. So what is the time? So this was all about fever, management of fever in brief in children, and we will be discussing the individual diseases that cause fever in their individual chapters, individual topic. Okay, for example, tuberculosis, malaria. So we will discuss in infectious chapter, that infection chapter, that what is the cause, what is the pathophysiology, okay, how to diagnose and how to manage those specific diseases in their specific chapters. Okay, so this was all about today's topic, that is approach to a child with fever. So hope it is helpful for you guys, and thank you for your attention.